There you go. Awesome. Lee and Destiny, nice to meet you in person, more
Yeah.
face to face than
Likewise.
on call. Um, I want to kind of introduce you to some of my listeners. Essentially, uh, I, as an individual, am interested in practicing and living by Torah strictly as it is in the doctrine. I value the entire Bible and the principles that exist within the Torah are the foundational principles that need to be taught to our youth, to both religious and non-religious denominations to increase quality of life. I see the Torah and the Bible as guidelines to life given to us directly from God. And I believe that you and your family have been living like that, and that's probably what brought us together. So this is encouraging for me personally because the religions and the particular denomination, whether you're Christian or Jewish, matters less than actually living by God's Torah, similar to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all the kings, Isaiah, and all these individuals who were like, you guys are following your own thing. Start following Torah again. And so you found Torah, and why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to whoever would be watching?
Yeah. I'm Lee Warren. I'm Destiny's dad. In 2022, I found the Torah. Um, it was an encounter with the Lord for me. It set the course for the last 20 years. It deepened my understanding of the New Testament after studying the Torah almost exclusively for 5 years. And we raised our family under the tenets of the Torah. We observed the feast days and the holidays in the Torah, and we just did it our own way. It wouldn't have been kosher from the Orthodox standpoint. And so Destiny has been raised in this environment her whole life and taken the normal course that we all take. And we come back to the truth, and so we're excited, Dan, about being here and you giving us your time and fielding our questions.
Awesome. I'm very much looking forward to it. And something comes to mind because I feel I haven't mentioned this in my other podcast before, but there is a website called Torah U, and it was founded by David Wenger, who contacted me, including Israel, and I kind of prompted him to uh, take action with his idea, which was to create a community of people who were simply Torah observant. From his label, he calls those who follow the Torah the remnant, right? Like the last people who are willing to follow Torah strictly without any denomination or religion. It's simply for their own quality of life and to worship God, right? And God being Jehovah, Yahweh, Adonai, Elohim, Hashem, the typical names. And I'm a teacher on that platform. And so people on that platform will see you. And I wonder if you have any words to share just off the cuff for people like that who are essentially like yourself, just following the law, building your own community. What have you seen in terms of the benefits, the flourishment of such a lifestyle?
Yeah, that's great. Well, come to understand that the Torah is the accurate arrangement of things, the order of the universe. It's the gift that the Creator gave to us to understand who He is and how He wants us to relate to Him. I've not denied or walked away from any of my Christian beliefs, but because about 85% of the New Testament is a remez, or it's a looking back to the Torah. It's been consistent with my walk with God. That's been now over 40 years, just really my pursuit of God. And so, if you're going to pursue God and you want to know Him, it's important that you start at the beginning, which is the Torah. And then everything else emanates from that, the prophets, the writings, all the Psalms, everything in the New Testament, even all the different opinions of the writers of the New Testament. It's all based on the Torah. and there's actually nothing inconsistent as it pertains to the references of the Torah.
Mhm.
So my encouragement is that in the world we live in today, um, if you want to be grounded and make it through uh, being a strong and vibrant, not only a human but a believer, uh, you need to dedicate yourself to consistently reading, studying, and understanding the Torah. I believe the words of the Torah are alive. If you were taking an antibiotic to rid yourself of a disease, that antibiotic goes into your body, it's alive, and it fights the things that are trying to harm you. In the same way, spiritually, I believe that as we read and study the Torah, it's alive. It was spoken by the creator of the universe, and so it's not just black and white on a page. It lives, and so when we eat it, when we declare it, when we study it, when we meditate on it, it is doing something to our human spirit, our soul, and it's bringing life, as you say in Deuteronomy. If we choose to study the Torah, it we choose life, and that's how I came into it, and that's been my experience for the last 40 years.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some questions. This way we can cover some ground because we're certainly on the same page. I myself um, started Orthodox Jewish um, and transitioned to simply Torah observant. You were Christian and kind of shifted more to Torah observant. But you see, with me, whether you're a Christian or you're a Jew, the commonality is the principles in the Torah and in Orthodoxy, which I was raised upon. That was watered out as in it still exists. Like if you go to the land of Israel, right, and you're an Orthodox Jew or you're a Torah observant Israelite or whatever denomination that you are, you're going to be in a place that understands our heritage comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have 1,500 years of historical documentation confirming that we took over and have this land for 1,500 years, not to mention all the archaeology. And if you keep the Sabbath, that's what's going to happen every Shabbat, and we're going to be saying Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov, and we're all going to follow the holidays to the best of our ability. So, having personally visited Israel as of recently, that still exists, but I do find that again, it's been watered out. So it's confusing, as in the rabbis have confused everything for the people when the Torah is very simple, similar to what you said. It's not in the heavens, it's not across the sea, it's in your heart and your mouth in order to perform it. And we can definitely, and as I mean we, people who are interested in refining the Torah and applying it in the land and beyond the land. And as a Christian, that's essentially what Christ did. That's why I see him as a prophet. I'm perfectly fine with the figure of Christ. I think he's an exemplary Jew, actually, right? He's following the law. He's kind of establishing grace, right, as opposed to Moses as the law. And if you don't remove that, which is the problem I find in Christianity, where they either read the book backwards, which confuses them, and more commonly, they just don't read the beginning at all, right? And that removes all continuity. It actually removes all the laws. You just have a story of Christ, which is it's a great story. There's a lot to learn from it, but there's nothing tactical there. So as an individual who searched for like a list of things that I'd be doing so that I could get married and have children and raise a family. I ended up stumbling upon the Torah, but then there's the second portion of things, which is we live in a culture of like hookups and porn culture and constant noise, as opposed to traditional values, marriage, children, and like thoughtful and responsible young males and females. And so that's its own separate issue. But let's start with your first question.
Okay, so my audience is going to be mostly Christian, and I was at a Bible study last week, and we were talking about something in Scripture, and it was brought up that the verse was the Old Testament. No, that's the Old Testament God, and I think most Christians see the God of the Torah as the law, do this or else. And I was raised in the Torah, so I never saw that as that was not my perspective of Yahweh at all. So that's going to go into my first question, which is For people who may only understand Judaism through Christianity or social media, how would you describe the Jewish understanding of God and Scripture?
Well, you have from the Christian perspective the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Son being Christ, the Father being Jehovah, Yahweh. So there should already be like an instant connection for those who are Christians. Like, oh, wait, we're not going to follow Christ. Like, at the very best, Christ is God in the flesh, which means a lesser version of God and his ability to interact with mankind. He's in the flesh. He actually dies. He doesn't come back really. It's been quite a bit of time. We haven't had him around. But God is a figure that has been for everybody. Like if you even read the Old Testament, you have guys like Balaam, who's like a seer, I suppose you could say, a prophet of some kind, but he's not Jewish. He's blessing the Jews. He's talking with God. He has nothing to do with the Israelites and the Jewish people. And that's a common theme in Torah, which is like the highest point is going to be by his own label, right? You say Yahweh, right? I say Jehovah because you could change the, pronunciation to it. But honestly, Adonai, Elohim, El Shaddai,
Mhm.
Christ, right? Like there are people who say that there's 70 names of God, 77 faces. Like I don't buy into that, because like one times infinity is still infinity, right? And so we're kind of in a position where you can't fall out on the highest form of God. Like he's presented himself that way. Why deny it? I don't deny Christ for what he's done. If anything, I'm in a position where, as a Jew who's against the orthodoxy and against the public structure, so both the religious and the social structures, that's like the Pharisees and the Romans, right? And so that makes me closer, and I can relate to that as a Jew who just wants to follow God. And I think that the labels and the names of these things are not worth tripping over each other. But ultimately, we're in service in terms of principles, which obviously are going to outweigh the name of God specifically.
Anything on that, Dad?
Uh, I'm curious, one of the names, I think one of the things that confuses Christians about that actually creates a confusion all along is that Jesus' Hebrew name would have been Yeshua, and Yeshua is a Hebrew name,
Hmm.
and Christ was a Greek rendering of the term Mashiach or Messiah. I think if Christians could correlate Yeshua, Jesus, as calling him the Messiah, then when they're trying to relate to Jewish people, they are, for the most part, not necessarily looking for Messiah or Mashiach, but they would understand the language if you understand what I'm saying.
I,
That Yeah. So Jesus Christ is a Greek rendering of what the Hebrew would have been Yeshua HaMashiach, if you want to call it that, specifically in Hebrew. So I think it's like his last name was, Christ, his first name was Jesus. So I guess the question is, if, from the Hebrew perspective of Messiah or Mashiach, is there any continuity between Christianity and Judaism in the sense of Messiah? Because if one day the Messiah comes back, we're all going to agree that's the Messiah. You know, whether the Christians believe he came the first time or whether the Jews are saying he's coming now for the first time, we're all going to look back if we really love Yahweh and we're going to agree this is Messiah. So I just thought you might have some sense or comments regarding that, the language used that's common to the Jewish people, but not necessarily common to the Christians.
I mean, definitely, again, I try to simplify everything as it's like, as a Christian, I know so many people who are Christians, and you ask them, what religion are you? And then they say, I'm a Christian, right? And you say, okay, great. Do you follow any of the laws? And then they say, no. I said, do you know any of the laws? No. Have you read the Bible? No. And so I'm like, Okay, so then you're kind of a spiritual person and you relate to Christ because that's how you grew up. So it's more of a cultural thing,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And the same is true within Judaism, as in it's like anybody who reads the Torah or the Bible straight through, they take away the principles that are there,
Mhm.
right? And if there is a shifting of God's name, a changing based on the time, I'm not going to, if I can go straight to the Father, right? As in, even this is the thing, you talk to Christians, or I talk to Christians, and half of them are like, no, Jesus isn't God. Jesus is just a prophet. And then you talk to another half, and they're like, oh, Jesus, 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 Jesus is God, right? And it's like, all right, guys, get your story together, right? And so that is a Christian problem that they need to handle. The only way that that, in my opinion, is ever going to be handled is if people study the scripture. And we live in a education system that has stripped us of moral education. And this is why progress is put above morality. And it looks like we're progressing into it's hard to not be profane, but I think you get the idea. And so that would be less like trying to figure out the names in the numerology. Like, what does the story say? Like, to me, the story of Christ is very simple. The Jews have the law and they don't follow it. The Romans are perverse and cruel, and he steps into the middle and they kill him for it. And he is redeeming everybody and basically saying, look, I'm up on the cross. I'm dead for you guys. Like, how do you feel now? It's almost like a haha got you moment because God really does exist, right? And so when you look at it from the perspective of the five books, it's never changed. And considering that's the foundation of all the principles, I think people need to be trying not to step on the principles and put these other extraneous details aside.
Mm. It's good. Like that. Anything? Go to the next.
Okay. How does Judaism understand God's relationship to mankind presented in the Hebrew Bible?
Could you repeat that question one more time, please?
How does Judaism understand God's relationship to mankind presented in the Torah?
So the problem is to speak from a Jewish perspective, unfortunately, is to speak from an atheistic, uh, Gemaric point of view, less so a Torah point of view.
Mm.
So how it should be
Mm-hmm.
is different than how it actually is. This is part of the problem with being a Jew who's had to step away from Judaism for the obvious reasons that we don't follow God's commandments, right? Like, um, I wonder if you could be a bit more specific with which you'd prefer me to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what he's saying is, are you asking me what my perspective is on God's relationship to man
Yes,
based on the Torah? Or are you asking me from a almost a social perspective, what is the Jewish perception of God's relationship to man?
your perspective as a Torah
Yeah.
observant
Oh,
man.
absolutely. I created God, speaking I, right, created the earth and this structure. I showed you the people that stood out to me, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I made promises to them. They were the only people really worth mentioning, all things considered. And you should learn from those stories. But eventually it translates to an entire nation of a God fulfilling his covenant and his promises. Like again, God is not a man who has to break his vows and lie, right? And so he did fulfill on his promises. His promise is still fulfilled to this current day. And his ask is very simple: follow my decrees and my ordinances to not be like the rest of mankind, as in mankind historically has been a disaster. It's been sinful. And still to this day, we're the only creatures that are bent on destroying ourselves. Like um, a, a mouse doesn't build a mousetrap, but we build like atomic bombs. And so uh, God is equipping us because he sees we need that sort of guidance. And it's a kindness to mankind to have such wisdom in such clarity and such concise writing. So it's again, it's guidelines for how he wants us to live. That's what the Torah is. And clearly, beyond the Torah's perspective, you go into the Old Testament to 1500 years of trying to maintain that and teach other nations because there was no other extension beyond the Jewish people to the Christian religion, expanding that to everybody on earth. And so, again, it's all in God's Bible. It's there for you to see. And I think that message is clear.
It's good. Well, kind of reiterating on part of that question that she had written down, and I want to hear it from you. Is the God of the Old Testament harsh or indifferent? Is Torah only rigid law? And does the Torah lack a emphasis on relationship with God?
No, it encourages a relationship with God. The wrath is certainly there. Like, look at the society that we live in. We're in America. Like, judgment isn't harsh to, murderers and thieves and pedophiles and rapists. It's like, yeah, it is harsh. But that comes with a good system of government.
Mhm.
In the Torah, God sets difficult and hard things to apply, but they create a very strong structure.
Mhm.
And so I do see God as a wrathful God, as somebody you should fear, certainly more than your government. And I think that he is kind and loving as well, right?
Mhm.
As in, just because it's like a king. I mean, we've been ruled by so many kings for thousands of years. It's like, is your king not wrathful? It's like, yeah, kind of is. Like, there hasn't been a king who hasn't been wrathful, certainly not a good one. But
Mhm.
if he is a good king, then he's more loving than he is harsh.
Mhm. Good.
And that is the God that I have a relationship with. That's the God of the Torah. He doesn't limit me, he actually frees me because he gives me these guidelines that in the short term are difficult, but in the long term, I'm going to be flourishing, right?
Mhm.
And this is the problem with modern society is that there is no awareness around long-term consequences of these things. And does that help
Yep.
answer the full question?
Yeah, I have a and I have a comment that will surprise you possibly. So, and I grew up hearing this from pastors that the Jews never really knew God as Father. So when Jesus came on the scene, he introduced this idea that you could have a relationship with God as Father. Now, of course, we know even in the liturgy, Avinu Malkeinu, my Father and our King. So could you remove that misconception? Because believe it or not, I would say probably 50 or 60% of Christians believe that the Jews never had any concept of God as Father.
Yeah, that's a shame. I feel like that is a clear representation of the fact that people don't read the literature,
Mhm.
right? And so instead of trying to convince people who haven't read it for themselves, I'm more interested in telling them read the literature.
Mhm.
And it really is that simple. I mean, even as a person, like let's take the Jews, for example. You say 50% of Christians can't deduce a simple equation. Um, 80% of the Jews are non-practicing. So we got 20% of the religious, which take up the Orthodoxy, the Hasidic, the Chabad, everything else. And um, in my opinion, those are the dumbest and poorest of the nation, right? When the rest of the nation flourishes in just about any society that it's in, even though they don't follow God's commandments. And so we're just stepping away from what's there. We're simply uneducated. Like, I think you'd agree with me here. I think more than 50% of Christians have never read the Bible from start to finish. They've read the New Testament a handful of times, but they've
Mhm.
never actually done it from start to finish. This is also the great chaos that exists within Judaism. There's so much commentary that's stacked on top of everything
Mhm.
that we ultimately never read without any commentary from start to finish the five books of Moses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why we're in the mess that we're in because we're talking about thousands of years of malpractice from Jews. If you just look at it from the perspective that, okay, there was Moses, there was Sinai, there was a nation. We also learned that that nation was extremely stick-necked and cursed. They were cursed. They literally got cursed to die out in the desert, and all of them had to die over the course of those 40 years. They were unworthy of anything good. And their children got the land. And for 1,500 years, we attempted to follow the commandments the way that it's written, but we lost the literature and we got it back. God has a very clear statement in the Torah: follow my decrees and my ordinances, and you will be blessed and protected beyond any rationale. Do not follow my decrees and my ordinances, you will lose the land and you will experience my wrath. It's been 2,000 years where the Jewish people haven't had their land, and that almost directly lines up with rabbinic Judaism being established as part
Mm,
of doctrine, right?
mm,
So
Mm,
and
mm,
I can only say these things, but when having a conversation with an Orthodox Jew, it's kind of like having a conversation with an insane person. So, as somebody who actually deals with people in addiction, incarceration, and in
come on.
homelessness, I have a harder time having conversations with Orthodox Jews, because they will rattle your ear into infinity, right? And so I'm not here to like convince like, oh, you have a great connection with God, cool. Like I just keep moving on, and I'm trying to influence people with perhaps only within the influence of those who consider themselves the remnant, right? I'd like it to be beyond that, which to me it has to do with talking about social issues, which is its own separate conversation.
Since we're going to be talking a lot about to a lot of Christians that actually study the Bible, the New Testament at least, could you describe just for your own self how do you, on a practical level, week to week, the study of the Torah? How would you describe you and your? I know you have a group of friends that do this together. Just tell us kind of how do you study, talk about uh, the Torah just on a practical week to week basis.
Um, well, at my faith meetings on Sundays from 12 to 1 at my boxing gym, I usually open up with a chapter of the 12 steps, and then something comes to mind in terms of relevancy. There is a countless amount of examples. I mean, the whole thing with the Torah is it represents life, how it really is, not how we like things to be, right? And I mean, here's a good one. Like my best friend, Israel Horowitz, is my rabbi, absolutely the most learned man when it comes to Torah. He not only rewrote and translated the entire five books of Moses as of recently, so that's a shout out to him, like unbelievable accomplishment. But he's a brilliant linguistic in both like Hebrew, Yiddish, now going to be Armenian. But the reason I'm mentioning him is because he married an Armenian woman, and she is completely Torah observant. And uh, that's a perfect example of like Moses marrying the Midianite, like
Mhm, mhm,
when the whole nation is
mhm,
unavailable, when you're banished from your community for nothing right, uh,
mhm,
there are things that will not exactly line up with the law all the time. And so
mhm,
even the book of the Torah shows that, right?
mhm.
And that
Sure.
those who spoke negatively about him, extremely holy people like Aaron and Miriam, they were sentenced to almost death, to
Mhm,
then from death to plague
mhm,
because Moses prayed on their behalf. Right.
mhm.
And
Right.
so that's one of many examples, but I could make about 10 or 15 more towards the practical day-to-day lifestyle of like Yosef, for example. Oh no, I'm going to have to upgrade this, our Zoom meeting. Uh,
It's
continue.
getting ready to cut us off.
No, that's not good. So if we can take a pause real quick so that I can pay for the recording.
Okay,
Um,
that's cool. Are you gonna send
I'll
us
still have the recording. Also, these things can be edited out, but
yeah,
Thank
honestly,
God.
I leave it in there. I think it's charming. I
yeah.
think human. Everybody tries to make things very
Perfect.
schematic and
Yeah.
perfect. It doesn't really sound human all the time. So,
Keeps it raw,
just
real.
absolutely.
You want me to ask him an in-depth question while he's trying to put his credit card information in?
No.
I am a good multitasker. We could give it a shot.
So I'll ask, so on a personal level, not
Well,
to communicate with, you know, the folks that you minister to, okay? I call it ministry.
mhm,
You're trying to redeem broken people by bringing them into the precepts of the Torah. So that's what you're doing in a public environment. And you, like you said, you take a normal situation and you translate the Torah into the real life situation, right? Application. But on a personal level, what is your own personal, if you want to call it a spiritual discipline, on your own reading of the Torah, meditating? I'm just kind of curious because this will be curious to Christians as well, because
mhm.
a lot of us tend to have certain disciplines, uh, but not like under regulation, but just personal, just like you do anything else, whether you're working out or anything you're pursuing. There's some kind of structure and order to keep you moving forward. Is there anything you could share with us on your own?
Absolutely. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, California. This is Sin City. And the way that we grow up here is to follow the societal narrative, to follow what exists on the TV screens, and to just be like everybody else, to go to college and follow this very, very structured way of living for every single human being. And I found that I rebelled against the things in Torah and in more towards Judaism, never towards Torah, um, because I was raised to value these things. And as I got older, and I realized that I was kind of following the structure that was set before me, which is like keep Shabbat, keep kosher, give tzedakah, give to the poor, uh, stand when your elders enter the room, and many other commandments such as that. Uh, that the people that I was surrounded by didn't live like that. And that was never keeping me down. That was propelling me forward and stopping me from tremendous damage, both in the present and especially in the future. And so when I've been through difficulties, I've always brought back to the source that has kept me strong, that has kept me rational, that has kept me faithful in God, and God continues to protect me based on that. So I feel that I'm a living example of the Torah saving me, just like God promises, which brings me back to the promises in the Torah and what I think all people should be trying to fulfill.
That's good. That's good.
I'm going to go a little off script because, like I said, most of my audience is going to be Christians and
Mhm.
Christians that, like you said, they don't study Old Testament Torah at all. So they don't understand the relevance of it in their lives. And so I'm going to ask my dad first. As a man, how did Torah and finding Torah and observing Torah change your life?
Mhm. Well, first of all, interestingly enough, when I came into Torah after studying the Bible my whole life, but as I started consistently going through it week after week, I take the chart, the reading chart, and go, through the portions or parashah. As I did that year after year, what I what I realized was, as a man, that in the Christian faith, women tend to express their spirituality in a feminine way. But the Torah gave that expression to men that to me most closely resembles a discipline that a man would take on. For instance, I was taught when I came into Torah, read the Torah portion every week, share that to some degree with your family. When you come to the Shabbat table, bless your children. Some very basic things. I don't have to pray as much as my wife does. I don't have to be as spiritually emotive as she is. I can just do some very basic Torah based disciplines of just being a man. And that elevated me spiritually. Interestingly enough, um, some of the challenges that I had in life were completely eliminated in this experience of all I can say for Christians is it elevated me spiritually. Okay. It made me more spiritual. It gave me a greater desire to pursue God. Um, it allowed me to move through difficulty in life and strength, um, not take two steps back and one step forward. So that's been my experience. It actually elevated me spiritually as a man, and with simply reading, studying, and doing some basic things of responsibility over my family and my children, it just elevated me.
And do you think that, because we see a lot of femininity in the church, do you think that has anything to do with the lack of Torah teaching or Old Testament teaching?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I believe, Dan, that uh, the church by and large has been carried by women over the last 2,000 years. If it wasn't for women, Christianity probably would have died off. And so what's happened is they had to fill in the gap and carry the church, nurture their children, teach the Bible to their children primarily. There was very little as a percentage of all Christians, very small percentage of the men actually teaching and training their children. So, um, so it's more of a feminine, let's say, expression of God that's expressed in the Christian church in general, and or just zero, none at all. Um, and and the expression of God in the male expression, is kind of taken away. So that's kind of what I would say in my experience and just by observation.
Well, you're correct, but that's a lot broader than just Christianity. I mean, men are no longer representing men in this generation. They're
Yep,
not
it's true.
responsible. I mean, it's like, we need to be leaders. We need to be building families. We need to fear God. Like these are the positions of men. We don't fear God anymore. We're not leaders, and we don't take on responsibility. And to your earlier point, like if it wasn't for women, the church wouldn't stand, right? Like it's like if it wasn't for women, we wouldn't be born, right? So the mother of all living is the feminine, right? But the Torah is given to the man. The laws are given to the man. This is relevant to today, by the way. My personal views on this were never like as intense as they are now, but I kind of feel the need to start voicing it. But we gave women their right to vote and do all these other things, and now we got 79 dead babies every year. Like 79 million babies are aborted every year. Like, call me angry and misogynistic. I don't really care anymore. Ultimately, I'm going to be the one fighting the wars, right?
Mm,
So when it comes down to God asking laws for man, the natural position is that women are happy in their home. They're not interacting with the world the way that men are. Actually, that's man's curse, right?
mm, yeah.
And what results in women having their happiness in the home or being around wives and mothers is an increase in birth rate. When that lack of satisfaction is promoted, there's a decrease in birth rate. And we have the worst economy we've ever had. We have the most depression we've ever had. If you want to talk about the historical collapse of societies over thousands of years of study, it's always sexual liberation with no boundaries to human sacrifice to the collapse of the society. You want to talk about human sacrifice, 79 million dead babies every single year. Like, I can't actually fathom that. That's a billion since 1997,
Mm,
right? That's 10x what all of the total death toll in World War II, which till this date is one of the greatest horrors to have ever hit
mm,
mankind. So,
mm,
this imbalance of masculine and femininity, the femininity that has entered men, has increased the masculinity in women. And
mm.
I'm a living byproduct of that society. I'm just very different than everybody. I find my power, my strength in the fact that I'm different. I'm happy I'm not like everybody else. And again, it makes me very sad. I feel lonely. Um, and that's the problem. You got sad, lonely men, which are going to ultimately rebel at a certain point in time, right? Which is the third portion of a collapse of a society. Now, I have advantages. I kind of fit a societal structure. I've been gifted. My father's a convert. I grew up in a family of arts. I had access to everything. I have five additional brothers. I feel blessed to say that both my friend Israel and Chris are like two additional brothers gifted to me from God as well. And I have a support system,
Mm.
but I'm a young man teaching responsibility to older men. I live in a society like if we're worried about, again, you mentioned prayer, right? I wanted to discuss that. In the Torah, there is not a single commandment to pray. And so this is part of our problem. There are people who serve God with their lips, but they don't serve God with their hands, right? When God never asked you to serve him with your lips, right? This is an actionable thing, right? As a man, you're teaching your family, and yes, women should be teaching their children. So the men, I mean, look, if you don't educate men appropriately, they become bad men, and bad men are the most dangerous thing on earth.
It's good. Yeah. Yeah, you're expressing the fact that the lack of Torah has not just impacted the church, it's riddled society with the problems we have today. And
Absolutely.
I grew up in the South. On Sunday, all the stores were closed. Okay, when I was a young man, and everybody went to church. At least you were exposed to it. Even if you weren't necessarily engaged in a high level when you went to church, at least you were getting the truth of the scripture on a weekly basis. We have none of that anymore. In fact, it would be hard to get most young people to even step into a church or probably a synagogue for that matter. Like you said, just as just a course of a weekly habit anymore in society. At least at that point, you were pressured to do it. It was part of what you did. And so we've really lost that.
Well, that
Um,
picture is good.
mhm,
Right? I think that that's missing. The problem is that both the church and the shul are an extremely repulsive place to take part of, you know?
mhm,
I mean, even in my own experience, in my own community that I grew up in my whole life, right? Like you can't even get married in your own community. Like what the hell is the point of a young man who can't even get married in his own community? Um, to me, that's absurd, right? So like all communal benefits just out the window. Like what are you going to get hired for a job? Like I had to do absolutely everything on my own, you know? And so I, there's a distaste also when it comes to religion, which is we are ultimately following man-made laws over God's laws. And you walk into the church and you talk about Jesus, 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 but you didn't give anybody any tactical ways. Like, how about read the Ten Commandments out loud? How about that? You know,
mhm,
most people should be able to reference the Ten Commandments by heart, right?
mhm,
Like again, you're thinking of keeping the Sabbath because that is a fourth commandment rule, right? So it doesn't matter if you're Christian or you're Jewish, you're going to know it if you read the Torah and you read the Bible. In the projects, right? In these uh, terribly hurt communities that are being funded by the government, that they have churches there. None of the people that ever grew up in the projects have read the Bible from start to finish, right? As a Christian, how in the world did you only find the Torah you said in 2018? Is
mhm.
that
2002.
2002? My apologies. And so, I mean, you've had more years behind you, right? And you had to find that on your own. So
Mhm,
shame on the church that brought you up. Shame on the shul that brought me up for teaching me all this rabbinic garbage. I mean, if I know it's part of the questionnaire because I read it, but it kind of translates to the anti-Semitism that lives in the world and stuff like that. All the hate that comes towards the Jews, it's because of the Gemara and the Mishnah,
mhm,
right? Now I can get into what exactly that literature is for your viewers,
mhm,
but it's commentary on the commentary on the commentary on the commentary on the commentary of the Torah. And you
mhm,
have hundreds of thousands of books, not hundreds of thousands of pages, to explain to you the 210-page document that the Torah is,
mhm,
right? And so I don't want to be like a Muslim, right? I don't want to have to go to shul, or I don't want to have to lay out on a carpet 4 times a day because I'm a Muslim, right? As an American, I feel the freedom. I have to work. I have to provide for my family. I don't have time to pray at shul 3 times a day. It's extra holy at Nate's. It's like, says where? Nate's, by the way, you wake up at 5 a.m. right before the break of dawn, and that's considered the holiest period. Like, that's a load of lies. That's a load of
Yeah.
lies. And so I know that that exists in the Christian church, and that is sending people away. And so, for sure, if you have any brains to you, what both the church and the shul are presenting to people is not true. So, what is going to be the alternative? Well, that's a load of lies. So then I'll just go here, right? And what tends to happen is jumping into hell, the secular culture being a part of everything depraved, not acknowledging your soul and your intellect, you're going to get burnt by that. So, one of two things happen, at least from my experience. You're raised in the religious, but you have some sense of masculinity or femininity, some intelligence or beauty to you. And so you naturally rebel against these things that make no sense. Then you end up in secular culture, and that messes you up worse than you ever could have imagined. And so the only natural conclusion is to go back, right? And it's like both of those suck. It's like you were right for leaving it in the first place, and you shouldn't have hurt yourself that bad in secular society.
Right.
And that's at least my point of view. You know, I think it's quite accurate. I think a lot of people in religion would acknowledge that that's the case. I mean, look at the Jewish people themselves. 80% are non-practicing. But like as long as you give the thumbs up to the shul that they can continue doing their thing that's absolutely ridiculous, then it's all fine.
Mm. Wow.
That's interesting because in the church, that's my experience with the church. Because when I left, my parents are like 18. I was like, see y'all. I'm gonna go see what y'all, didn't teach me or whatever. And I was involved going to church every week. And to this day, I look back and I'm like, I didn't learn anything actually in the church. It was the same thing. I always felt like they would use the pastor as a middle ground between you and God. And I'm like, where in the Bible does it say that this is supposed to be the way that the church works? I thought that the church was for discipleship. And now it's how they get, people in to kind of like, reel them in to get them saved, keep them in for an hour and hopefully, when we do altar call, they're going to come up and get saved. Or I mean, it's the same teachings over and over again. And it's not something that teaches you how to live your life. It's just explanation on scriptures. And it's the same explanation on scriptures. I have not heard pastors, at least from the churches that I've gone to, really go in deep on scripture and give you some sort of, I don't know, like a basis for how to live your life on a day-to-day basis. Just besides just it's very it's up in the sky, open for translation. And every pastor has their own, viewpoint on it or interpretation, which are very vastly different a lot of times too. So it's a lot of chaos, if that makes sense. I just didn't understand the pastor being the person that explains scripture to you, but most people don't ever go farther than Sunday. They just stay with just what the pastor says every single Sunday, and they don't read scripture for themselves. So you're reading scripture through someone else's interpretation and perspective of God. And then you have theologies. You want to get started on theologies too, like which is a whole nother whirlpool of things. So it's interesting. It's the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would have been my imagination on it. Not even my imagination, that's my personal experience from dealing with mostly Christians. Because when it comes to Orthodoxy and Jews, they're just doing their own thing. That's what they care about. It's kind of like the parody of like Fiddler on the Roof. Have you ever seen that?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like
a couple thousand times.
for some reason, that is considered like, oh, we're so proud that that represents us so well. It's like the dumb guy who is ready to destroy, who did destroy his children's lives, the dumb guy who couldn't quote scripture, the poor and dumb community. What
Mhm.
happened to the beautiful, strong, warrior-like Jews that ruled a land for 1,500 years miraculously. That's one of the longest standing nations to ever exist in human history in all of antiquity. What the hell is this? This is what I'm supposed to be proud of? That's literally
Mm.
the joke. The guy says, "The good book says," and then he like forgets his train of thought, right? And so we're in Christianity and in Judaism, it all comes down to principles. Actually, we need to embrace each other, Jews and Christians, more than ever. It's like, who else is reading the same book as you? Like, if you're a
Mm.
Jew, the Christians are reading it. If you're a Christian, the Jews are reading it, right? The
Right.
principles that exist there to be there for the destitute, to understand the God who progressed from revealing himself to individuals to becoming the God of a nation, to establishing himself in a land, to then giving his doctrine to everybody.
Mm.
Right? And so I don't, as a Jew, and also by the standard of the Torah, I know this is in the notes as well, but there's this chosen people thing that creates like a
Mm.
total sense of elitism. The only places that you can find actual quotations of elitism are again in the Gemara and the Mishnah and the Talmud.
Mm. Mm.
When it comes to the Torah, there are simply zero examples of elitism.
Mm.
First of all, the word is it's not chosen, it's treasured people. So God
Mm.
values us,
Yeah.
but you're treasured because you're supposed to be a holy nation, a nation of priests to
Mm.
preach amongst the nations.
Mm.
So you have a duty, and the duty is what makes you treasured. The moment you're not following your duty, you're actually in deep waters, really deep waters. And there's
Mm.
lengthy, lengthy curses in the Torah for those who
Mm.
don't follow the decrees and the ordinances.
Mm. That's good. That's very good. Yes. So what you're saying is for the Christians, the concept of chosen is a man-made concept. Uh, anytime you feel like you're chosen, it doesn't really matter what you do, whether you're an athlete or whatever. There's an arrogancy, right? That turns people off, especially normal folks. And so you're saying that the concept of chosen instead of treasured, right? Treasured because of obedience, right? I mean, he said it, if you don't follow the Torah, I'm going to spit you out of the land, which is what happened, right? But they're an example to us as well. We can't point our finger at the Jews and say, well, no, this is an example of humanity and anyone pursuing God. We have to be, we're warned, you know, if you follow the gods of the heathen nations, then I can have nothing to do with you. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you pointing out the fact that
No.
the idea of being chosen isn't necessarily a Torah concept.
Yes. And again, even if you just wanted to go with chosen, because that's a perfectly fine translation as well.
Right.
So what? Chosen. Like you were chosen to do this job. You're like,
There you go.
let's take Saul, right? Saul
Mhm.
was anointed by God to be king. His ego got the best of him, and he lost his kingship instantly, and he was cursed with an unstable mind for the rest of his days as he was killed in his own kingdom with his son next to him,
Right.
impaled on his own sword.
Mhm.
David was anointed, and David made mistakes, and he had two generations of kings, and then that was it, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, even though initially God is saying, your lineage will live on for forever, right?
Mhm.
In terms of king in the house of Judah. But that's ultimately not what ended up happening because everybody didn't follow the law. So if you were chosen to do specific work in any field, right, you would have to complete the tasks above you or you're fired. You're ultimately
Mhm.
fired from your job, right? And
Mhm.
so here we can jump into the next question.
It's good. The temple and life after the temple in, let's just say the Torah-based life. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Interestingly enough, you can read a historical book by a man named Josephus, and uh,
That was a great.
Josephus, yeah, Josephus, as Jerusalem is being destroyed, is riding a chariot around, begging the Jews to give themselves up because they have no chance of winning this fight. The Romans be willing to allow you to keep worshiping in your temple, just give up. And at that moment, they thought, the Jews thought that they were so close to God, even though they had strayed away, that God was going to save them. And again, this is not a beat on the Jews. The point is they perceive themselves in an incorrect way in their relationship with God in an incorrect way. And ultimately, the temple is destroyed. Um, life as a Jewish person after the temple. What can you explain that to Christians? Um, just give us some understanding how you perceive it. Um, you know, in the modern day, there's no temple, but the transition maybe from no temple to modern, Torah observance. I'm not going to say Judaism. Where can you give us just a sense of how the transition occurred from your perspective in history?
Well, first of all, the temple was never really that important, right? Like the temple came after the nation was saved. The temple came after Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.
Mm,
Uh, it was a small hut, more or less, right? We have its exact blueprints. It's not that big.
right.
It's supposed to be in the place that God Himself says that it's supposed to be. So you'd have to actively be communicating with God in order to establish it anywhere.
Mhm,
There again are sacrifices and perhaps an additional closeness to God that we could have, but if we're not following God's commandments like He asked us, what makes us think we have the right to establish a temple?
mhm,
Because we don't. There are
mhm,
steps here, right? Like the foundation of the people is that they're following the commandments the way that God said it. That would bring the people together and it would make them unreasonably strong or irrationally strong.
mhm,
And then they could follow the blueprints, but I would say even before that, they'd have to hear from God Himself, as in God would have to make His presence known for us to take a step like that. It's not like we establish a temple, then the Mashiach comes. Like it's not like again, the Mashiach is not in the Torah. This idea that there's going to be this man that saves us from all troubles, like we return to God, right? That's what happens in the end of all days. We see that in history we have put the temple and the mysticism and all these things that we don't understand be above God. And that's exactly why God hates us, and God says very clearly, like, and I believe this is in Isaiah, like your empty sacrifices and your festivals detest me. You don't
mhm,
Mhm.
treat your neighbors well, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
as an individual, I've taken it upon myself to write that book of mine called The Children of Israel, which just quotes the Torah for all the practical commandments. I removed the temple and the Kohanim and the laws that establish. You're not saying that they're unimportant, but they're
mhm,
not something that we can follow, certainly for the time being. And these
mhm,
are all the other things we can do. So why
mhm,
don't we
mhm,
start there?
mhm. It's good. That's great. You want to get into the more of the topic of anti-Semitism?
Yes.
That's what.
Oh yeah, so that's my original intent with this conversation was, well, three, mostly two different perspectives of really just educating people on misconceptions. Because in my generation, I don't think anyone knows how bad it is. It's all over my social media. I don't even know how it gets on my algorithm, but just different things, accusations, this is what they did, this wasn't even real. They run all of, uh entertainment. They're just so many things. And so that's what I was wanting to address in the first place was a couple of questions, which was, where do you think modern anti-Semitism gets Judaism wrong? What are some of the most common theological misconceptions that fuel anti-Semitism? How has misunderstanding the Hebrew Bible fueled it? What narratives concern you most today that are being spread by social media? So there's a couple of them.
Yeah, yeah. I can go through those real easy. First of all, just as like a general understanding, even though it's more theological, like the Satan, the Satan, the devil, right? Like he presents people half truths, right? That's what makes him so dangerous, is it has the ring of truth. You hear it, but it's only half true, like two truths and a lie, right? And so when it comes to the flame that the Jews get, a lot of it comes from the Gemara, right? Which is what we need to stop following as Jews. So again, like, Jesus burning in shit and, we're elite and the rest of the world is going to serve us and they're going to be our slaves. Like these are legitimate
Mm,
quotations from the Gemara. And why? Because these individuals were the exact people who had the destruction of the Second Temple happen. All the
mm,
rabbis that were talking amongst themselves and were obviously immoral decided
mm,
to dictate, write down all of their conversations and turn it into book that actually took precedence over the law,
mm,
right? And that's what we have been following. That's what I was raised on, right?
mm,
Now, even within Orthodoxy, which they say nasty things, but they're not even remotely as nasty as most people perceive them to be. As in, like, we have our Havdalah candle. It's a tradition at Shabbat ends. We light the candle and we dip our pinkies in the wine that we drink. For years, that has been propaganda on Jews that, like, during the Passover, we're drinking the blood of Christians, and that this is blood, and we're like, it's like it's not blood, it's wine, it's a candle, right? But nobody actually knows what goes on because the Orthodox close their doors to absolutely
mm,
everybody. So they look suspicious when they don't need to do that. They could be like, look,
mm.
what we do, we're weird, fine, but we're here you go and
Yeah.
we need to do our things our way. Jews don't take that position because they're closed off. Nobody can actually see what's in,
Mm,
and they are going to be dealing with the problem that the Gemara says a lot of terrible things that they shouldn't be following. They shouldn't be following that in the first place. I think that's a major reason why we get the hate that we do.
mm.
Um, yeah, if you want to go for it.
No, no, I was going to say in the terms of Christianity, we'd say that in my perception, actually, and I know that the Jews, let's just make the assumption that if when Jesus came, if all the Jews had accepted him, then the rest of the world probably would have never heard about it, right? So uh,
Keeping it within the door.
so the wonderful things of the Torah that are expressed in the Jewish community, we never get a chance to see it. For instance, this is another misconception I'm sure you've heard, is that the Jews follow the law. It's this drudgery. They're like dragging this stone behind them all the time, and they're never happy. And they're just having to do the law. And one thing I experienced when I came into the Torah and how a little bit of exposure to Jewish families was I ended up doing some business with Orthodox Jews in New York, and I would call them about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'd already shut down at 12, and I'd hear the kids laughing in the background, and you could tell they're having a great time. They weren't dragging the Shabbat stone around, with burdens. They were actually enjoying themselves. So, that's one of the misconceptions is that it's just this huge burden that this, tens of millions of Jews are dragging this Torah around, and it's a burden, and there's no joy, and there's no life in it. And I know that's not true.
Well, again, it's not entirely true, but
Mhm.
this is a level of truth that does exist. As an Orthodox Jew, I can tell you what it's really about. If you want to talk about a burden, right? Think about God asked you to follow a 210-page document. That's gonna basically basic like ethics and etiquette, laws of kosher, Sabbath, the holidays, which are one day. With the extension of Judaism, you're taught that there's not only 2 days of holiday, that there's tons, like literally thousands and thousands. I believe it was 3,500 laws that are in the Gemara, when according to even their miscalculation, there's only 613 in the Torah, but there's 3,500 in the Gemara. And then, I mean, there's like way less than that in practical Torah, right?
Right,
Certainly with the removal of the temple and the Kohen Gadols.
right.
And it's ever growing. So that rock that they're carrying, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger
Mm,
because they value what's called oral Torah, right? Now, this is the reality. If oral Torah was valid, then the Zoroastrians would be the oldest religion and the most powerful, right? They predate us and they have had an oral tradition before the Jews. But that's just not how reality works. It's not how history works either. A written document is what precedes the oral document.
mm,
And the Jews have this very inappropriate train of thought that there was an oral Torah given to us at Sinai, which allows us to practically follow the written Torah. And we have been maintaining the oral Torah since the time of Moses, and that's the job of the rabbis, and that's what the Gemara is actually doing that.
mm,
Obviously, it's not true at all, right? Because it's just like me saying, here's the Torah, here's everything that you need to do. You have tons of proof, starting with Joshua, straight up
mm,
getting off the nation, saying you guys need to follow the five books as is written. You have King Josiah finding a parchment of the Torah and reading it out loud. You have Ezra reading the Torah from start to
mm,
finish. Start it from start to finish, which is not that hard. It doesn't take months, right? It takes like a week. And he did it from start to finish for the whole nation to hear it out loud because they weren't celebrating Sukkot, they weren't celebrating Passover. And again, the reason Ezra was powerful because he was following the five books of Moses. That's a
mm,
quote from the Old Testament. And so it's just a giant lie, and it is a huge burden. You think it's lovely that God tells you to eat kosher, but for some reason you can't have chicken and cheese. You can't have even meat and cheese together. You can't, you have to wait 6 hours in between each of your meals before you have dairy and meat. Like as
mm,
if it matters the other way around. They're like, oh, it's science. Like it's not science, it's bullshit, right? And the wrath of God comes upon children like that, right? Even though it's just human beings being abusive to their children, right?
yeah.
And not freedom, that's restriction. So
Mm,
of course it's unhappy. To me, again, a perfect example of what Judaism has been is Fiddler on the Roof.
mm,
Consider me exited out, okay?
mm,
Consider me not wanting that for my life. So
mm,
I'm a different type of Jew, and ultimately the Torah is what has me be a man of service, right?
mm,
I don't self and my ego. I serve God. God says to help the destitute. God says to honor your father and your mother. And of course, there are individuals who have a better understanding of even simple literature, and
mm,
it's going to be beyond the repetitions that you put into a piece of literature. It's like there are some people who like know calculus before calculus has ever been taught to them, and then there's the rest
mm,
of us that shouldn't have learned calculus at all because it's done absolutely squat for us, right?
mm,
And so when it comes back to anti-Semitism, that is a real part of Judaism, this pain and suffering and this restriction. And we do it because of God. We're the eternal sufferers. But that's not what God asked of us. And by the way, it manifests in some really, really nasty ways. We have a terrible disease that is only for Orthodox Jews because we
mm,
intermarry. It's called Tay-Sachs. It's terrible. And so the reason this is even relevant, like I shouldn't even have to have known about this, and I'm a Sephardic Jew with a converted father. But Orthodox Jews were asking me, like girls, when I was going on dates, you need to get your blood work done. We need to see if our heredity so that we don't have like deformed children. It's like, damn, like, did you ever read the Torah where it says you don't even need to experience infertility anymore? Look at
mm,
how far away from the tree we've fallen, right?
mm,
And in reality, is that suffering only exists for the Jews, though, right? And it's restriction, and it's very much a pacifist way of living, right?
mm,
This is why we're so damn weak every time somebody tries to attack us and make us do whatever the hell that they want, which is clearly negative for us as Jews, historical Jews. But it's true, but it's also not true that we are like, digging tunnels under people's like bank accounts and draining everything in their society. That's the propaganda that Hitler used, and it
mm,
worked. And he had way less powerful tools than we do now in order to propagate these lies.
mm,
Like all these lies would instantly be capped out by people if they actually went to Israel and visited it.
mm,
First of
mm,
all, like as more or less Christians. Like, you go to the old city, it's one big testament to Christ. That's ultimately
Mhm.
what the old city is,
Mhm.
right? You're going to
Mhm.
see his grave, where Mary, where he had his meal, where he slept. Like, come on, you know? And then you have the tomb of David and obviously the wall, but the wall is like pretty insignificant, all things considered. Even the Muslim temple, right, which is the third least important, that is where, well, Mecca is where, according to the Muslims, Abraham erected his altar, his first altar.
Mhm.
Abraham, who the hell is Abraham? You know, it's like, yeah, the guy that got promised the land of Israel for his generations, the one who got the Torah, right? The Jewish people who came from him. And so I just see an overlap when it comes to Torah, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians are all
Mhm.
actually celebrating the same God because there's only one, right?
Mhm. Yep.
You might have lots of different names, and that's
Mhm.
okay for you to come upon it on a different name as long as we follow the same principles.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the anti-Semitism that exists, a lot of it comes from the malpractice of the Orthodox Jews and the fact that that is a dirty and unlikable lifestyle. That's why the majority of the Jews don't practice. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not like bashing on, like, honestly, the way that I interact with Orthodox Jews at this point, because I've had a distasteful experience, is kind of like, makes you happy, do your own thing. I'm happy, you're happy, right?
Mhm.
I'm
Right.
doing my own thing, right? And honestly, as long as it's not hurting the world and other people in it, I'm mostly fine with those sort of things.
Mhm.
In which case, Judaism is a better reflection. Like, they do stay married, they do have kids longer, they are reading the Bible, even though it's a very confusing way to do it. It's strange and it's weird, but it's not any weirder than people who have open relationships in white culture, you know, who like, it's certainly not weirder than that, you know.
Mhm.
And so um, I think you kind of get my point of where
Mhm.
it's coming from, but we can be doing ourselves a service as Jews by being a better example. And there is the unfortunate correlation, which is also true, to non-observant Jews being in positions of power.
Mhm.
And I think that is a bit of a testament that there is something about being raised under the biblical formula that makes people very intelligent and capable.
Mhm.
And to me, this is like a Benjamin Franklin quote, you know, education is what liberates people, and moral education is part of education.
Mhm.
So it has to be taught, both Christian and Jew. This is
Mhm.
why the churches were being funded by the government, as opposed to nowadays, if you have a religious institution, it won't be funded by your government because that's separation between church and state. The
Mhm.
thing is that's not actually constitutional.
Right.
That is from the country to each individual state, but the state can apply donations to any religious institutions that it's want. It's just that the federal can't give it to the entire state based on a religious example. And so, you know, it's like that was the America that grew up. You had the
Mhm.
people who left the indoctrination of the church to want to follow the Bible strictly, and they migrated and they intermarried and they repopulated. And just like Israel, by the way, has
Mhm.
been a 3,500-year war, that is between them and the people that they're in war with. For
Mhm.
us as Americans to be distracted by ultimately a very small death toll to a response of a war where 2,500 people were killed and raped in broad daylight, just like the 2,500 people plus that were killed on Pearl Harbor, and we nuked the hell out of Japan, right?
Mhm.
They miraculously only had about a 50,000 death toll, and they wiped out the area, and most of the Palestinians are still okay. They live in Israel. They serve the people in Israel. They live well and happily, as opposed to if the roles were reversed, Israel would just be the same empty heap that it's been for a long time. And there's been Jews living in Israel the whole time. There's been Jews who call themselves Karaites and other forms who have had small groups, but the Christians have taken over the land of Israel. but the Jews had it for the longest period of time. And there's archaeological proof. And
Mhm.
yes, we took it over. I guess you'd be right that the natives of the land prior to God having taken over that piece of land, but that's a battle between the people who think that they're natives and the other people who think that they are. At this period in time, even though I'm not a particular fan of Zionism, we won the war and we fought really, really hard for it. Really, really hard. So anybody who studies history on how Zionism came in,
Mhm.
the concerns come from the fact that there are the Rothschilds.
Mhm.
Um, there are these big banking corporations that harm us in the US, and they happen to be Jewish and also help Israel, right?
Mhm.
So there's something shady going on, but for the most part, we're just a third world country in the Middle East experiencing our same 3,500-year old war that has nothing to do with everybody else who's being promoted with violence and ego. Like, you really want a downfall of a society? Porn, isolation, ego, violence. That's what's going to do it.
Mhm.
Not Israel. You can't even get on a flight and travel to Israel, you know? And I recommend that people do that. It's very much like the US. They're going to accept you with open arms.
Mhm.
Me individually, um, I think that we should try and reform the Judaism that exists in Israel because that's been, in my opinion, wrong for the past 2,000 years, but it still exists more so than it not being there at all, right? And
Mhm.
so there's hope for us to get better. I'm happy we have the land, and
Mhm.
people need to stop being so anti-Semitic because then we're just going to be looking at World War III in whatever way that you want to look at it that way. It's like it was certainly enough to get people to whip people in the street 10 years before the war started. There were these things called whipping orgies where people would just whip Jews to death in the middle of the street, and it's like that's now considered a hoax. And this is because we're not educated both
Mhm.
morally and we're not educated socially either.
It's great.
Yeah, I could agree. A lot of it's definitely miseducation because there's so much information out there. You don't know what's true anymore. Like you're wondering, I hear this all the time where someone will post a video about, a history snippet and they'll be like, well, we were never taught that in school or something like that. And there's so much, an influx of information. It's hard to figure out what's true and what's not.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm very grateful that I was raised the way that I was because it's easier to sift out
Mhm.
all the misinformation, but not everyone has that.
Mhm.
So can't assume that everyone does either.
I have a interesting question, maybe
Mhm.
one of the final ones, but what I noticed now, I'm going to use a Christian term, revival, and I'm going to apply it to what I've observed in general about the nation of Israel, and how I've observed it. I like to since the Gaza war, I had this little picture. It was a it was a medley of songs called Am Israel Chai. Okay, and there's hundreds of these that have been done that are posted on YouTube. And what I see personally is I see this spiritual revival that's occurred in Israel that I think it's a spiritual revival where you have these videos of of the of the soldiers coming together with the Orthodox, even, and they're maybe for the first time, they're actually coming together in unity. They're dancing together. People don't understand much, and the men are dancing together. And these are not secular dances, they're dancing to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they're declaring him in these huge gatherings in Israel. And I just happen to, enjoy some of this worship. My young grandson, he and I dance and worship to one of these medleys of Jewish songs. Don't understand the words, but I guess what I'm feeling is this um, this sense of energy and unique um, spirituality. And I know there's a bunch of Orthodox secular Jews that are joining in. I don't know if it's in sincerity, but if you look at the videos, if you observe these huge crowds of people, where a secular musician will be leading them in songs of of praise to Yahweh, I have to look back and say, looks like there's something happened over there during the context of this Hamas war that wasn't there before. Do you have
Mhm.
any sense? Am I
I
dreaming
have
that up? Or,
personal experience of it. I went on a birthright trip before the war, and I went recently in July of 2025. And there was a huge spiritual shift. First of all, if you believe in the Torah at all, God says He dwells in this land. This is why you shall not spill blood, for I dwell in the land, right? And so you have to experience that for yourself. It's pretty clear. I experienced that both before and after. But think like the Jews are such a small population of people. They're taking over this little morsel of land that really like is not that much. It's like, is Los Angeles as a piece of land better than Israel? Like probably, right? The only difference there is we have the Spirit of God there, right? And so it's bringing the people back to their heritage. They don't understand it very much, but the intention is clearly important, as in God cares about our heart.
Mhm,
And the heart of Israel is getting stronger. They have to be careful that they don't corrupt themselves. But that's why I have, I mean, that's why I have a great craving to go to the land, to be a part of them. You know, I am a part of them. That is my heritage, right?
mhm,
Uh, it's a bit of a struggle because as an American, my allegiance has always been to America,
mhm,
right? But now that America is falling apart, it's like, where else are you going to go? Right.
mhm,
And so for the Jews, for people interested in spirituality and holiness, perhaps that is where it'll all end up. And I think it is important to talk about intention here because when I went to the land, right, I was being, I was staying at the King David Hotel, which is
mhm,
10 out of 10 experience. I couldn't recommend it more. And I was taken to the roof of the hotel. I asked if I could go up there and see. So they had to have somebody come up and take me. And before I went, I was served meals by Muslim and
mhm.
Jews. But one of the Jewish workers, my mom decided to ask her, like, or actually, it's obviously you can't work on Shabbat, right? But you have she didn't want to write down on the notepad the order. And we're like, but aren't you working on Shabbat? But instead of my mom saying that, she said, why won't you write on the notepad? Because it just didn't make any sense. And she's like, well, I don't want to write on Shabbat, right? And it's like, she thinks that she's keeping Shabbat right now, huh? Right. And then I went upstairs and I talked to the young woman that was giving me the tour. She just basically let me do my own thing, but we had a short conversation. And I brought that up because I said the same thing to her. I was like, "Are you observant?" She's like, "No, I'm working on Shabbat," you know. And I said, like, I smiled. I was like, "Well, you know, the lady downstairs, she was on a notepad, and when we asked her why she wouldn't write down the order, she said because she doesn't want to break Shabbat, but she was working."
Mhm.
And it was like I short-circuited this Israeli girl where she was plain like, and I just kind of was like, the rabbis make everything confusing. And she was like, ah, yes, right. And so that's the reality, which is there's these traditions that we put above God. I have this, I wonder if you could indulge me in like just a social experiment here, right? Let's
Yep.
just say it's like the Matrix, right? You have here the red pill. This is a red pill. You see it, right?
Mhm.
Here's the blue pill, right? Red and blue pill. They both look evenly sized to you right now, but in reality, one is bigger than the other. Which one is bigger than the other? Well, I'll tell you what it is. It is the red pill. So I'm going to re-ask you, which one is bigger, the red pill or the blue pill? They look the same, but if I were to show you outside of the computer screen, it's actually like an inch larger, right? So which one is larger, the red or the blue?
The red pill.
The red pill, right? And that is a perfect example of how tradition, first of all, the reality is there's nothing in my hands. There's no red and blue pill. And I just
Mhm.
told you that one is bigger than the other, and you accepted that because I taught it. And so tradition is taught, and eventually just turns into lies. Like we accept that. Like moving forward, I'm going to be like this. There's a red pill and blue pill, and I ask the next generation, and they're like, "Oh, well, actually, my Rebbe told me that the red pill is actually twice as big as the blue pill." Right? When you're really just dealing with a bunch of indoctrinated people. And so I
Mhm.
see 2,000 years of tradition built up as lies when we need to return back to the law. We need to return back to the Torah. And if you're a Christian, if you're anybody, the doors have been completely open to you. If you
Mhm.
want to be happy about the superpower that the US is, if there were ever a confirmation that following the Torah strictly will result in a flourishing society with protection like never before, that to me is the American story. So
Mhm.
I have an equal allegiance to both America and to Israel. It's the observance of the laws and the maintenance of the principles that matters the most to me.
Mhm. Wow. And obviously, like you said, living in LA, there's not a whole lot of support for that lifestyle, meaning following the Torah.
No.
And there would be some type of support in Israel. I know my first recollection, we went to Israel in 2015. We went to the first little, uh, it was on Ben Yehuda Street. And we step into the first shop, and I'm looking for some trinket to buy. And the Jewish merchant looked at me and said, "This is not coming to Jerusalem is not about buying things. It's about being close to God." Now, here's the merchant trying to sell me something, but the first words out of the first merchant I experienced in Jerusalem is, "You need to go find God." That's really what he was telling me. And the truth is, how many shops in America would you walk into, right, where that would be the instruction of the merchant, you know? And so there was this wonderfully a holy spiritual. You know what? I when I left Israel, I could say in my heart that I felt more at home in Israel than at times in America. Um,
Yep.
I was in the northern, and so of course I encourage Christians to go to Israel just to experience it. I believe one day, that's where we're going to end up. When it's all said and done. Um, but anyway, um, we appreciate your insight. Is there any other questions you have?
I got one question. This is the closing question for both of y'all. If there is one thing the Hebrew Bible reveals about God that you wish people understood better, what would it be?
Well, that it's for everybody.
There
Like
you go.
that's the whole point of the Torah. God said this is for
Yeah.
everybody. Here it
And
is.
that's great. And what do you come when you come into the area they call the Kotel, the Wailing Wall? There's a sign, a luminescent sign, and the scripture on it. Because when you're there, you feel this. It says, "This will be a house of prayer for all nations." Right?
It
And
is.
so I agree with you
I
that it
mean,
was meant.
again, for people who have a hard time supporting Israel, you have the four quarters that exist in the old city. The
Yep.
first quarter being the Armenians, second being the Jewish quarter,
Mhm.
third being the Muslim quarter, and the last quarter being the Christian. It's
Mhm.
like, what, like, why don't you just look at, like, you guys need to look in a mirror for a second, like these are the four most, like, when it comes to holy, influential cultures that have been around for longer than everybody else, those are the four
Mhm.
cultures,
That's
right?
right. Yeah,
All
that's
dwell
good.
together and they're happy there.
Mhm.
I promise you they're happy there. They're upset that the war destroyed their income, right?
Mhm.
It destroyed everything that happened. Nobody's happy about the war. Now, there's lots of conspiracies that come around this thing, which will, like, of course, increase anti-Semitism and angry and lonely men. Um, but this is a male issue. Like, men are extremely prone to video games, pornography, and conspiracy, right? Like, unfortunately, dealing with addiction so often, like I realized that not only have I had to overcome my own addictions, which I wasn't even aware of, um, I had to not only become aware, but then battle it completely on my own. And we're talking 90% of the world, right? Like,
Mhm.
unfortunately, that I know it might seem off topic, but we have 30 to 35% of women watch pornography and 70 to 90% of men. the amount of damage that that does to a human being and their ability to interact with the world, like the screens are designed to shorten attention spans, to pump people with dopamine. It's like that is the design. We need to stop rewarding outrage and lust, right? We need to start coming back to real connection and responsibility. And the Torah for me
Mhm.
is the thing that propelled me to do that. It gave me purpose when I think we live in a world with very, very little purpose and meaning.
It's good. It's great.
That was a great answer. That's what I was looking for. I think this is kind of off topic, but once again, being a part of the church, I just realized that most of the churches taught replacement theology anyway. So that's why when you're saying, well, why can't they just look in the mirror and see, you got the four quarters, they're all, living together happily and all that. Well, the church teaches replacement theology. So they don't really even study the Old Testament in the first place. They don't understand our identity, which is kind of taught to you in the Old Testament, right? And then, there's just so much. I was watching this one pastor or teacher. He was harping on why the church shouldn't have the Israeli flag in the churches. He's like, this is against law because the Star of David is, if you ask any rabbi, it's not actually like historically based. It's like satanic or something along those lines. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, the entire church celebrates pagan holidays. And you're worried about the star and a flag that y'all already are is like you already teach that
A thousand
the church
percent.
is replaced.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't be any more right. I mean, if I drew a circle, the internet would put a Star of David in there and say it fits perfectly, right?
Literally.
Uh, it is beyond silly, but it's actually working, and that's the concern.
That's what's so
Yeah.
scary. It's
And
so
so we'll have
concerning.
to see. But like I said, combating these major issues, like AI is not going to be the thing that destroys us. It's us going to be the things that destroy us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fire can cook your meal or can burn a city. Nuclear weapons can give
Mhm.
us power to hospitals and our cities, and it can also destroy nations.
Yeah.
The things that are going to get us are absolutely those earlier factoids that I was mentioning. And it's a big struggle, but if you have God by your side, anything is possible. So you
That's
can
right.
remove that word impossible from
Mhm.
the dictionary and start working towards good things.
That's great.
All right.
We appreciate it, Dan. It's been
Absolutely. I
wonderful.
really enjoy the conversation. God bless
Thank you
you.
for your time. Okay,
Yeah,
God bless you.
likewise.
All right. Bye bye.